Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. We have reached mid-November. There's a lot to talk about with Penn State football up to number 4 in the college football playoff rankings. Very well positioned to potentially host a first-round matchup in Beaver Stadium that weekend before Christmas. We'll talk about the next step for Penn State as they try to punch their ticket to the playoff. That will be a trip to Purdue this Saturday, 3:30 p.m. kickoff Eastern time. They'll take on a Boilermakers squad that has not won against an FBS opponent thus far in 2024. It's been a struggle for them. They've faced a couple top-ranked teams in the last month, and Oregon and Ohio State failed to produce a single point against either of them, and Penn State a heavy favorite, a 4-touchdown favorite going on the road. We'll learn more about Purdue later on this episode of the Lions 24/7 podcast from a Boilermakers reporter within our 24/7 sports network. Learn a little bit about what has gone wrong for that coaching staff. This is not the same program that pushed Penn State to the brink in that 2022 season opener. But we're going to begin this episode with a lot of focus on recruiting. I promised you on Monday when Mark Brennan and Daniel Gallen came back on the show, and we talked about the Washington matchup and what we heard from James Franklin on Monday. I promised we'd have a lot of recruiting to get to because there were a couple commitments over the weekend. There is a lot of visitor feedback coming out of the whiteout matchup, and we got a couple other pieces to address as well. We'll do that right now with our resident recruiting insider, Tyler Calvaruso. So, Tyler, welcome back into the podcast, and a big tip of the cap for you. We got through Ohio State matchup, which brought a lot of recruits to the town, and then the very next week, last Saturday night, the whiteout, and we know that's a party every single season. So tremendous coverage to you, from Brian Doan, from Alan True, from our 24/7 Sports Recruiting Network, but particularly you locally here on the Nittany Lions beat. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. You said it best. Big hat tip to the national guys. Without them, I mean, they're awesome. They're awesome to work with, and they're such a boost to what we do here at Lions 24/7. And I heard I was listening to a podcast yesterday on the way to the gym. I heard your promise, so now I got to deliver. I'm locked in.
We appreciate you for making us a part of your listening experience on your commute, Tyler. And let's jump into it on recruiting. We've got 2 commitments to get to. Let's talk about the one that happened more recently and the one that's more timely because the 2025 commitment, and we're now less than a month away from the early signing period, finalizing plans for members of that 2025 class. And a lot of these guys will be on campus in a matter of 2 months as January enrollees. And Chaz Coleman out of Ohio, we've discussed him a few different times in the podcast, including last week, looking toward the matchup against Washington. He has been a rising figure in this 2025 class. Penn State's been on his radar for a while. He comes to campus. He gets a good feel for the program. By Sunday, he is committed to the Nittany Lions. Before we get to the prospect profile on Coleman, talk us through his recruiting journey that led him here to Happy Valley.
His recruitment journey can really be summed up in the last 3 months. That's really when he started popping onto the radar, going back mid-August. That's when the Power 4 offers started rolling in. Credit to Ole Miss for being first to identify what Chaz Coleman is and what his upside is, because he has it. And we'll get into that. But from a recruiting standpoint, Penn State offered in the middle of September. Did not take long for the Nittany Lions to push hard to land Coleman. Deion Barnes centered in on him as a top remaining target quite quickly. Penn State had its eye on Coleman heading in to his senior season, as did a lot of other P4 programs. Then once those first few games got on tape and the evaluation continued, Penn State loved what Coleman was doing out there. They saw the tantalizing upside, moved on him with the offer, prioritized him, got him to push hard to get him to campus for an official visit. Penn State wanted to be one of these officials just in the event that Coleman decided, hey, look, I'm going to take things beyond the early signing period. Penn State wanted to get him on campus early, trying to lock this one down. Kentucky succeeded in that first, hosted Coleman for an official visit in the middle of late October, rather. Penn State gets Coleman to campus for whiteout weekend, and everything checked out from Penn State's side. The measurables checked out. They meshed well with Coleman, which wasn't really a surprise to anyone in the Lash because the relationship was always going really well behind the scenes. But you never know what's going to happen when a guy gets to campus. Coleman makes it to town. Everything goes well. Sunday night, he's on board.
Coleman is a guy who's a multi-sports standout in Warren, Ohio, which is northeast portion of Ohio. He reported at least a Division II offer on the hoop circuit this summer. Averaged about 15.7 boards, 3 assists last year as a junior. But on the football field, Tyler, it still feels like there's a lot left to be figured out about who he is from a fundamental and positional standpoint. You talked about the length. We've got him at 24/7 Sports at 6'5", 225 pounds. I don't know if that's the most up-to-date measurements on him yet. You can correct me if it is not. He's number 26 athlete in the composite rankings. He's a 4-star composite, which is the industry average. We've got him as a high 3-star at 24/7 Sports, again, labeled an athlete. So talk us through who he is, what he brings to the field, and where he's going to play initially, at least for Penn State.
Those measurements are close enough. I should actually probably go in and update it. Coming out of this visit, he's just shy of 6'5". He's more 6'4.5", which is still really, really good because his wingspan checks out and is where it needs to be for a potential pass rusher at the next level. He's also in that 220 to 25 range. So what we have on 24/7, that's pretty much what Coleman is. So none of those juiced up numbers from high school staff there. That's legit size from Coleman. And I understand that, we've seen this dialogue on the board that there's some parallels to Tyler Warren. He's got the basketball background. He plays quarterback for his high school team. But I think Chaz Coleman is going to make his money as an edge rusher at the next level. I think Penn State sees that as well. And if that changes down the road, so be it, because we're talking about an elite level athlete, quite frankly, because he just oozes potential from an athletic upside and potential standpoint. But I think edge rusher is going to be I think that's going to be his moneymaker in college. And the more I watch Coleman, the more I think that if he hits and he does what he needs to do in his development, there are going to be some other programs that were keeping him warm and not necessarily pushing. They might be kicking themselves down the road. I think Chaz Coleman has that kind of ceiling. He's going to be going into Chuck Losey's strength and conditioning program already solidly at that 225 range with a frame to carry more. And you got to keep in mind, he's going to continue to develop as a pass rusher under the watch of Deion Barnes. So you're going to talk about a prospect who is already physically impressive, still has room to grow, and then working with Barnes, he's going to be able to develop his pass rush moves, learn the nuances of the position, what it is to succeed as a pass rusher in the Big Ten. So as that bag of pass rush moves gets deeper, because right now the fact of the matter is Coleman could really just rely on his elite athleticism to blow by opposing offensive tackles, make them look silly, get the quarterbacks. That's what he's been doing. He's still coming into his own as a pass rusher when it comes to the finesse moves and, what makes an elite level rusher, like we're seeing a guy like Abdul Carter become right before our eyes. So, yeah, I really like this get for Penn State. I've asked around outside of State College. There are a lot of people who feel Coleman's going to be a guy at the next level. And he's raw, but he's not one of those prospects who comes in and is raw. And what I mean by that is, he's not going to take maybe 3-4 years to get onto the field. It could be one of those deals where if he hits early, he could, factor into that rotation for Barnes' redshirt freshman, redshirt sophomore. So this is it's an intriguing late cycle get. It's the kind of get that you really love to add less than a month before the early sign period.
Yeah, and we're not quite sure what that defensive end room is going to look like next year. You're certainly expecting Abdul Carter to take advantage of his great season and become a high-level NFL draft pick. The Niden Sutton injury situation right now is tricky, but I know he's a year 3 guy, former 5-star. He's got a lot under his belt. You can understand why he might at least give it some thought. And then Smith Vilbert's a 6-year player. He's not being year 7 guy. And then Amin Vanover is a 5th-year senior. So those have been your primary defensive ends. And, are they all here? Are any of them here next year? I think that's a fair question. And so this class could be pretty key. There's other components on campus currently that are going to have a head start. But Jaden Woods is the top-ranked member of this recruiting class. He's an edge rusher prospect, a guy that we really like in the state of Pennsylvania from the Pittsburgh area, Deshaun Burnett. He's playing a little bit of everything for his defense and for the offense at the high school level. We saw him play some linebacker, but you start to project him as an edge rusher. A lot to like about this class, I think, for Deion Barnes. And when we look a little bit further down the road, there's a lot to love about this pickup for Phil Troutwine in the 2027 cycle. And I know people get freaked out when they hear that we're looking so long-term, but these are the kind of prospects that can be the building blocks for eventual big-time recruiting classes. And Leighton Vandenbosch, he's a guy that we spent some time here discussing a bunch, I feel like, in the summer, Tyler. He had a camp performance at State College High School that we really liked. He came to Penn State's team facilities, was thrown a bunch of reps, really handled that opportunity well. And when our 24/7 Sports initial rankings for that 2027 class popped up, there he was as a top 50 talent, one of the premier offensive linemen in the country out of Middletown, Delaware. And now he becomes the second player from his high school program to hop on board with the Nittany Lions recently. He committed while attending the whiteout, and he told us this summer the whiteout, attending it was a dream for him, and now I think playing in it is the next phase of that dream for Leighton.
There are a couple of reasons why Penn State fans shouldn't be freaked out. I completely understand that it's early, and we're not talking about an early in-state commitment either.
Hold on, Tyler.
Yeah.
Let me just say, I butchered his name. I can't believe this because I've said it a bunch of times. Leighton Von Brandt. I can't believe I
was going to let you go.
The wrong last name to him. Yeah, Vandenbosch. That ain't right, but that's an old football name there. Leighton Von Brandt from Delaware. Let me correct myself before you go much further.
No, you're good, man. But he's really just – Penn State has always managed to stand out to Von Brandt in the sense that relationships are big for him. They're crucial. And he's told me multiple times he feels Jan Franklin and that staff inside of Lash, they do a better job of building relationships than any other program in the country. And that's not something I see changing over the next 2 years because we all know how it goes. Just because you're committed doesn't mean your recruitment stops. That Penn State staff's going to continue to go after Von Brandt as hard as it did while he was an uncommitted prospect, with countless Power 4 programs calling and checking in with that staff down in Delaware on a daily basis. And you got to keep in mind as well, Jasir Rogers is committed in that 2026 class for Penn State. Those two are close, and those two have talked about teaming up at the next level. Rogers kickstarted that, maybe kind of the reverse order some people were expecting, Rogers being the one to go first, considering he was something of a more under-the-radar recruit at the time of his commitment to Penn State, while Von Brandt was already on that national radar. But those two are tight. They're excited to play together at the next level. Von Brandt's already peer recruiting. He's going after five-star Max Hiller, the Coatesville standout, and those two are tight, and I'd keep an eye on that one, to be completely honest with you. It's still early, but Penn State's doing well there, and Von Brandt is only going to help the Nittany Lions with Hiller moving forward. But in terms of the player, I mean, we saw it going back to the summer with the camping. He moves so well at his size. There's a lot to be molded still because he's only around 250 right now. But we always talk about frame and frame projection and what he can add in a college strength and conditioning program. Von Brandt will be able to play at a tackle in the Big Ten at a very competitive level and maintain the athleticism that makes him an elite prospect in that 27 class. And the other thing that's come up, and I think the other thing that we saw with our own eyes, was for a sophomore, this kid has that alpha personality. He was front of the line in all the drills. He was trying to take as many reps as he possibly could, get as much coaching as he could from Phil Troutman, from Frank Leonard, from the rest of the staff. So that's the kind of personality Phil has shown that he wants in his offensive line room. That's who Von Brandt is. So I wouldn't necessarily worry if I'm a Penn State fan. Again, it's early. He's not from Pennsylvania. I get it. But I think Dome put it best, to be completely honest with you, when discussing Von Brandt's commitment on the Lions Pride board. It would take something special to get him off Penn State. I truly believe that.
Or something awful for the Nittany Lions.
Yeah.
I think you feel pretty secure about this one, even though you have a long road to travel, because I believe Leighton Von Brandt told me in June, one of the first times we talked, that he said Penn State was going to be pretty hard to move away from the driver's seat. And when you're hearing that from a guy before his sophomore year, and you know that he's a legitimate prospect, you start to get the warm and fuzzies about what it might mean for the Nittany Lions. It didn't take too long. They get him on board here in November of 2024. And you talk about, working on Max Hiller. Max Hiller and him were both Max Preps All-American from the freshman class last year. I believe Leighton Von Brandt is about 30 pounds heavier than he was during that freshman All-American season too. He's an evolving player. Hiller's a guy that's a little more established, closing in on 300 pounds. They're already there as a high school sophomore, but you're talking about two of the best. If you were to combine them in the same class, you're talking about one of the elite tandems in the entire cycle for 2027, and not to mention what you've got cooking in 2026 with Kevin Brown on board, who we believe is kind of all-American tackle potential himself. He's dealt with an injury this year at Harrisburg High School, but a lot of really impressive pickups on the offensive line for Phil Troutman, looking a little bit further down the road. Tyler, we'll talk a lot more about that 27 class for years to come. We'll talk more about the 25 class in the weeks to come, because we are going to jump into that whole conversation during the signing day, which is just a few weeks down the road. But let's discuss some of the key impact that was made during the whiteout experience on uncommitted guys. And actually we're going to start with a guy who is committed, but not to Penn State. And that is a top 100 wide receiver in Quincy Porter, someone who was certainly one of the key targets for Penn State for much of this past offseason until he ended up in the Buckeyes class. He's been committed to Ohio State for a while, but he popped up back in Beaver Stadium on Saturday. What do we need to know about this one?
There are a couple things that come to mind with this visit. We always say it, so I'll start with the obvious. Anytime a guy who's committed elsewhere pops up on another campus this late in the game, it's notable. The other thing that stood out to me about this trip was this wasn't an instance of Quincy Porter making the trip because a bunch of his Bergen Catholic buddies were there with him. It was the complete opposite of that. In fact, Jordan Thomas, who's a 2026 prospect, who's high on the board in the secondary for Penn State, was in Columbus for multiple days this weekend. So this wasn't Porter just making a trip to Penn State because his Bergen Catholic teammates were going. That actually, if he was going to do that, that would have happened earlier in the year in October when a bunch of Bergen Catholic players visited Penn State for the UCLA game during Bergen Catholic's bye week. So this was done on Porter's own accord. Penn State has continued to push here. And I think coming out of this visit, they have a little bit of a sense of, hey, this is one we can get done down the stretch here. What I'm looking at right now with Porter is, Bergen Catholic is in the midst of a postseason run. Porter wants to end his high school career with another state championship, but that shouldn't necessarily prevent him from getting back to Ohio State for another visit if he wants to do so. If that were to happen, I think the Buckeyes can maybe squash this one, kind of solidify things, because Porter has a great relationship with wide receivers coach Brian Hartline, who does a great job out there recruiting his receivers. But Penn State, Marcus Hagans and James Franklin, they want to get this one done. They've been chipping away behind the scenes. They get Porter back to campus, which is a huge win in itself. And now we see where things go. But again, there's this sense. I get this sense of, hey, this isn't crazy. We could get it done.
Exceptional high school film for Porter at a pedigree program there in New Jersey. And as of now, going to be the next in a very, very successful pipeline of top prospects going to Columbus at that position. So it would be a major, major turn of events if the Nittany Lions get him on board here with the 2025 class. Again, days are dwindling to make that happen, but a good indication that Porter's at least being receptive, the fact that he was in the building last Saturday. Also in the building, 5-star Baltimore edge rusher Zion Ely, probably the best defensive lineman we saw in camp action this summer. I don't think that's big of a statement to say. He is the number 1 ranked defensive lineman in the 2026 class nationally. He's the number 2 player in the country per 24/7 Sports, and he was back at Penn State. This is going to be a battle, and that goes for a lot of contenders involved with him. But Penn State was the latest to get their shot.
It's going to be a battle. Penn State probably still has some ground to make up just because Oregon's done really well. Ohio State's done really well. There are a bunch of programs that have done really well with Zion Ely. But Nittany Lions to get him back to campus, and I think they impressed. Going back to my first conversation with Zion Ely in March when Penn State offered, he felt that Penn State's edge rushers and DNs were used in a manner that fits his skill set, plays to his strengths. I think he saw a little bit more of that on Saturday night. Again, there are layers to this recruitment. NIL's a factor. And Zion Ely has been really all over the place for visits. So distance is not a factor in this recruitment. But Deion Barnes has a good relationship with Ely. Ely has said in the past, Barnes was one of the first coaches who took a chance on me. That resonates. So this is one that it's going to be a difficult fight for Penn State. But getting him back to campus in the first place was a big deal. And I do think the staff and the Nittany Lions made a positive impression on Saturday night.
Throwing a couple names your way here on this one, both in the trenches, both in the top 24/7 rankings for the 2026 cycle. Luke Waffle, an edge rusher out of New Jersey, and then Carter Scruggs, an offensive lineman from Virginia.
Yeah, Luke Waffle's not quite Zion Ely in terms of prospect profile, but he's up there on that edge rusher portion of the board for Deion Barnes, and he's had a good visit. He called it eye-opening in his interview with Doan, another guy who some of these guys, they need to see Penn State's D-line and the defense in action, mainly because you got a first-year defensive coordinator in Tom Allen. A lot of those guys got eyes on Penn State's defense when Manny Diaz was calling the shots. Waffle was one of them. He was on campus for a visit while Diaz was in place as D coordinator. Now we get to look at Allen's defense. Goes well in that regard. I anticipate Penn State will remain heavily in the mix for Waffle moving forward. Same deal with Scruggs. I actually think Penn State leads for Scruggs at this point. I think coming out of the visit, the Nittany Lions have done a good job with him. Phil Trotwood has built a strong relationship. Scruggs has emerged from every visit really with effusive praise for Phil Trotwood and the Penn State staff. So I think early on, Scruggs is one of those top-of-the-name boards. He can give you some positional versatility. He's a swing guy, can play tackle, can play on the interior. And I think Penn State likes that versatility, one of the biggest reasons they pushed. And the interest is definitely mutual at this point.
And then a couple defensive backs to get to. Top 100 Maryland cornerback Kari Adams, and then top 24/7 Ohio safety Caden Gebhardt. And Gebhardt, of course, we've brought his name up before. He's a former high school teammate and a current close friend of Penn State freshman quarterback Ethan Grunkemeyer.
Yeah, Corey Adams, one of the top cornerbacks in the 26th class at this point, has developed into an elite prospect at the position, one of the top names on the board for Terry Smith. Back on campus for the third time, visited twice during the summer. His first time getting back for a game as an offer target, and Penn State's defense, again, stood out, impressed Corey Adams, liked what he saw out of Smith's corner. So Penn State will remain under serious consideration from Adams moving forward. And likewise, Penn State will continue to push really hard to get him. Penn State sees Caden Gebhardt as really an ideal fit in his defense. And if you get the opportunity to go check out his junior season film, because it's really, really impressive. But they see him as one of those hybrid guys, linebacker, safety, and fit into that lion role. He loves that pitch from Tom Allen, who he's gotten close with since working closely with Allen during camp in the summer. And obviously, Ethan Grunkemeyer has played a big part in this because he has been, I've heard nothing but positive in his praise for Penn State staff. Those two are not just former high school teammates, they're best friends. And teaming up the next level is something they've discussed. Penn State would give them the opportunity to do so. I want to do a little bit more digging here before I get to this point, but coming out of the weekend, if I was going to pop in a crystal ball for any of the visitors, it would probably be Caden Gebhardt. There's a lot of positivity surrounding this recruitment for Penn State right now.
So the 2026 class, a lot going on there. You want to keep tabs on it. Go over to Lions247.com. Tyler Calvaruso, Brian Doan and company have a lot of updates coming out of Whiteout Weekend. Those were just a few of the names to know, but there is a ton more with our VIP coverage, which you can access now for 30% off at Lions247.com. Tyler, we are fresh out of a new installment of the top 24/7 rankings for that 2026 class. So there's always a ton to sort through when it comes to one of these new releases from our network. And I'm just curious, filter it down for us. What do we need to know from a Penn State perspective?
A lot of movement among top targets for the staff, but the biggest news on the movement front is Matt Sieg making the climb into the top 100. He is now the highest ranked member of Penn State's 2026 recruiting class, checking in at number 71 nationally and asking, really trying to get an idea of why this happened. It just comes back to the athletic profile, the testing numbers, the track numbers, the multi-sport background, which appeals. There's a lot going for Matt Sieg from an evaluation standpoint, and he's now among the nation's elite, not just at his position at safety, but overall. So he's on an upward trajectory, and Penn State's well represented in the top 24/7 in the 2026 class. 5 of their 7 commits are ranked among the nation's elite. A lot of movement. We got plenty of coverage of that over at Lions 24/7. But the big news coming out of this one's Matt Sieg making that jump. Well-deserved one, I think, at that.
Yeah, Matt Sieg is a guy who it feels a little while ago because we've had a couple commits followed up, but he jumped on board during that Ohio State weekend and one of the key in-state targets for Penn State. And it's always nice that, as your coaching staff, to see a little bit of a validation there in national rankings. Not that they are waiting to see rankings to offer our target players, but Penn State, you'd rather be in front of the rankings curve than behind it, and they tend to do a pretty good job of that, especially here in state. Tyler, let's finish up with a note on basketball recruiting because the early signing period for hoops across the country has arrived. You've got a story up on Wednesday at Lions247.com. breaking down Penn State's early signing class and the 2025 group here. Look, they're off to a good start on the court right now. They're 3-0. They're putting up points. They've got some newcomers doing some solid things. Mike Rhodes wants to build something long-term here at Penn State, being competitive for tournament opportunities on an annual basis. So they got to stack talent. They got to stack classes. What do we need to know about this group in a couple minutes from you?
Another solid group. I think just the presence of Caden Mingo alone, top 50 combo guard from New York, I think that him alone, he has the chance to make this a transformative class for Penn State. Because there are people who think he has that face of the franchise potential for the New Lions. He's going to have the chance to step in, take over for Ace Baldwin, take the reins of Mike Rhodes' team right off the bat if he gets to campus and does what he has to do. And beyond Mingo, Mason Blackwood's a really intriguing talent on the wing, and with Justin Hauser, the in-state center from Phelps School, they're really just banking on his upside. He gives Penn State what it wants out of a big. He's got that interior presence defensively, and then on offense, he can play down low, but he can stretch the floor for you and open things up a little bit as well. So it's another solid 3-man group for Rhodes. And you just said it best right now. You want to stack classes? We always talk about that Penn State football program doing that. Now Rhodes is doing it on the basketball side.
Tyler, really appreciate it. We hit on a lot of different topics here. You've always handled it well. Basketball, the football. You can check out all of his coverage over at Lions247.com. No home game this week, no home game next week, but we're creeping up towards the early signing period. This 2026 class has a lot of moving pieces, maybe some new pickups coming sooner rather than later. And Lions 24/7 is where you want to follow Tyler Calvarusso's coverage. Appreciate it, my friend.
Thanks, man.
Let's continue our coverage here on Lions 24/7 podcast with a look at the Purdue Boilermakers. In order to do that, we bring on from within the 24/7 Sports Network, Sean Williams, who covers Purdue. And Sean, we appreciate you coming on board. I know it's not the prettiest picture to paint right now in terms of where this program is, but we do appreciate someone coming on to paint it for us, give us a little bit of an overview about how the Boilermakers kind of limped their way into this matchup. So thank you so much for the time.
Yeah, limping is probably the best way to describe it, honestly. I mean, really, at this point, Purdue's sitting, with one win on the season. That was their season opener against Indiana State. They're trying to find their first, FBS win, first Big Ten win. So, Ryan Walters is trying to, is kind of grasping a little bit, fired their offensive coordinator after Game 4, after their game against Wisconsin. So Graham Harrell's out. Pretty intriguing story. Ryan Walters, who has a defensive background, takes over, as play caller for the offense. So that's kind of an intriguing story. But I mean, it really hasn't done a whole lot of good since then. Their best chance to get a win was against Northwestern. That went into overtime. Obviously we know what happened there. They come up short, and now they've got a tough stretch down the stretch to try to grab a win. So obviously over against Ohio State, they couldn't get the end zone there. So they're really struggling on both sides of the ball, offensively and defensively. Defensively, they can't get a pass. It's hard for them to get consistent pass rushing up front. They've had some blown coverages, and offensively, they're just struggling to score on the ball, especially against quality competition as well. So.
Yeah, well, let's break down the schedule just a little bit. A win over Indiana State, as you referenced, 49-0 in the opener, but it's been 8 consecutive losses since then, the last 6 of which occurred in Big Ten action. You mentioned 45-0 loss to Ohio State last week in Columbus. A few weeks earlier, October 18th, they took on Oregon on home turf and lost 35-0. Put up some points against Northwestern, 26-20 loss in overtime. In mid-October, they lost 50-49 in overtime against Illinois, which was a lot of points for Purdue. But beyond that, they have not scored more than 21 points in a game since that season opener. So, like you said, it's been a struggle to score the points. They've been giving them up in bunches. And so I'd imagine now year number 2 starting to come to a close for Ryan Walters as head coach of Purdue. He is 5-16 as the head coach there since taking over. 0-6 in the Big Ten this year, 3-12 in the Big Ten overall. He had a really nice run as Illinois' defensive coordinator. And as you said, it's interesting now that he's calling the offense. But he's clearly making some desperate moves. And they're 16th among 18 teams in total offense in the Big Ten. They're 18th in total defense in the Big Ten. So how much trouble is Ryan Walters facing right now with a few weeks left in year 2?
Yeah, I definitely say the seat's pretty hot, and I think, the biggest thing kind of going down the stretch here, I mean, you could say that their next best chance for a win's against Michigan State. We'll see how that goes. But, I mean, just honestly, just kind of the way they play, how much, can they look decent on offense? Can they put some points on the board? Can they look competitive? I mean, I think that's kind of the biggest thing you want to see in this last stretch of games here for Purdue. But, yeah, the seat's pretty warm, I mean, he took a desperate measure, firing his offensive coordinator, and now he's, the play caller, and he's got a defensive background. So he's trying different things, and you kind of got to credit and commend him for that, for trying to fix things on his own. But at the same time, I don't know if that's the best option right now, So it'll be interesting to see if Purdue will have, a little bit of leeway and wanting to bring him back for a third year. I know they're kind of behind on NIL funds, and I know that's something they're trying to fix. So will they give him a third year to see if he can kind of turn this around? I mean, I think if they end up doing that, his coaching staff's going to look a lot different if that happens. So, we'll kind of see how things go. They might decide to cut bait and just start over, but that's kind of up to Purdue's brass to see. But I'm kind of curious to see, just how competitive they look, down the stretch here. You've got a tough game against Penn State, and we know they haven't done good against top 5 teams. But Michigan State's probably your best chance to get a win. So we'll see how they look there. And you got the Indiana's looking pretty good offensively now. So can they stop them? Probably not. But we'll see.
I was going to say Purdue's got to finish with Indiana, which means in the final 6 games of their schedule here, as of now, Indiana's the top 5 team. They got to play Ohio State between now and then, but they'd be looking at 4 top 5 opponents in those final 6 games between Indiana, Penn State, Ohio State, and Oregon. It's been a struggle offensively for the Boilermakers. As I said, they put up a bunch of points against Illinois in overtime that week, but not at 21-plus points throughout the season, except for that FCS matchup earlier in the year. When we talk about the quarterback position and the pieces around him, can you walk us through what this offense is working with right now?
Yeah, I think they're back to being pretty healthy, honestly. They had Hudson Card. He went out hard. He went out for concussion symptoms in the Wisconsin game, so he missed the Illinois, the Oregon game. And so they were kind of forced to, play Ryan Brown in those games. And obviously, you talked about that kind of offensive explosion they had against Illinois. That all happened in the second half. They were down 24-3 at halftime in that game. And then all of a sudden, they had an offensive explosion, got in overtime, at a close loss. But really, since then, I mean, they had that's really like the only time the offense has really been rolling with Ryan Brown, under center. And against Northwestern, Hudson Card came back, and they tried to they started him, and he led them down to their first scoring drive to kick the field goal. But then, Walters tried to bring Brown in for a couple of series because he's more of a dual threat quarterback. So you kind of wanted to kind of utilize his strengths as a runner in that situation. But the 2 drives he was in on, they didn't do anything. And, really their best option was passing the ball down the field, which Card did a great job in keeping Purdue in that game and actually bringing them back to send it into overtime. So, Walters is still trying to tinker with, who's going to be the starter. I think Hudson Card will be the starter. I think we'll probably see Ryan Brown for some series here and there, designation, and trying to utilize his legs and things like that. But, Purdue, even in that Northwestern game, they had their Georgia transfer wide receiver, C.J. Smith. He came back. I think he's a good weapon for them to have down the stretch in terms of trying to stretch the field and get in the end zone. He had a 32-yard reception. He had over 50 yards in that game. Was shut down a little bit against Ohio State, but that was against Ohio State. So I think, offensively, I think they've got the weapons to, get in the end zone and score some points here. But they're relatively healthy on offense. So that's a good thing down the stretch.
Card, a veteran presence at the quarterback spot, year 5. He's transferred in from Texas a couple of years ago, was a Purdue starter last season. So he's got a lot of experience under his belt. Hasn't always been the great results, but it's not a quarterback who should be overwhelmed by this matchup in particular. When you look at the ground game, I know they've got a couple runners over 300 yards. Devin Maccabee is at about 6 yards per carry. I think James Franklin mentioned it feels like he's been at Purdue for like 7 years now at this point. Can they rely on anything there? I know the recent scores don't indicate they could, but in order to alleviate some of that pressure on Card in the passing attack against this Penn State defense, what can they counter with on the ground?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say that. I mean, I think if that's the one successful thing they did against Ohio State was the running game and Devin Maccabee. He kind of stepped up and had, I think he might have had around 70 yards. Can't think of the total off the top of my head, but he also had some yards out of the backfield, pass catching too. So that's the kind of an element he can bring to the table. And he's had a couple of really good games in a row. And they brought in Reggie Love from Illinois, a veteran running back, and he had some really good games earlier in the year. So they got a nice 1-2 punch there in terms of veterans at the running back position they can kind of rely on. And Maccabee's been one that they can rely on all year. He's been pretty consistent.
Maccabee, 87 total yards against Ohio State. He went for 168 rushing yards against Oregon State back in September, went over 100 yards in that 1-point loss against Illinois in October. Defensively, this is, Ryan Walters' bread and butter, and what really put him in a position to get this head coaching job at Purdue was his excellence as a defensive play caller, including here in the Big Ten. We have not really seen that sustained in West Lafayette, though. What have been the biggest issues for this defensive unit during the course of 2024?
Biggest one's creating pass rush up front. We're just getting to the quarterback, creating any kind of any kind of rush up front. It's kind of something they've really struggled with. And, They've had some injuries in the secondary as well, so you've seen some blown coverages in certain situations, especially against top-tier teams. So that's kind of reared its ugly head. So, yeah, those are really the two biggest ones. But the main one is just consistent pass rushing.
Is there anyone on the Purdue defense, though, particular players, individual standouts that, this guy could make a play? He could change a drive. He could halt the Penn State momentum. There's that kind of potential in the mix.
Yeah, linebacker Kedron Jenkins and rush end Will Hield. Those are your two. We talk about not getting a consistent pass rush. Whenever Purdue does, generate some pass rushing and some pressure in the backfield, it's usually those two guys. Those two guys lead the team and tackles for loss and sacks. So those are going to be kind of your two guys up front that'll make some noise in the backfield if possible.
What can you tell us about Purdue special teams? My understanding is they're doing a late season open competition at kicker, and that's usually not a good sign when you're in mid-November.
Yeah, Spencer Porvath, he's missed some gimmies actually, in the last 2 or 3 weeks, but he missed a couple against Ohio State that could have put him on the board. Talk about I think field goal attempts from inside the 30-yard line, inside 30 yards. So there's an open competition there. Ryan Walters kind of said, we'll see who we go with on Saturday. So, yeah, never a good sign whenever you're doing that. Special teams-wise, they also had a block punt against Ohio State, and that really generated the first score for Ohio State. They got it inside the 20-yard line on that one, and that was kind of a blown coverage assignment there, or a blown blocking assignment there. So that's something to kind of watch out for as well. But, yeah, never good whenever you're having a field goal competition in November. So we'll see what happens there.
It seems like the ship is kind of leaking in all three phases right now for Purdue. But if they were to maybe get on a better track on Saturday afternoon and perhaps, make things a little more complicated for Penn State than what many anticipate as a 4-touchdown favorite, why would that be the case? What do you think is a pathway for Purdue to make this more interesting than what many of us anticipate?
The biggest thing they haven't really done all year is just get off to a fast start. And I think, for Purdue, I think that would really help them out. Maybe, hey, we'll receive the ball, put a drive together, put it in the end zone, go up 7-0. And then, hopefully you get take advantage of turnovers. Hopefully you can do that early in the game and that happens. And they have a lead. I think having a lead after the first quarter would really help their confidence, honestly, and that's something that they haven't had all year. So just putting points on the board, that's a big thing for them. Putting it in the end zone, they had 2 or 3 opportunities there against Ohio State and couldn't do it. They tried to go for it on 4th down and came up short. So, just putting the ball in the end zone, gaining some confidence, I think that would really help them out.
Sean, let's finish with this. When you forecast the matchup on Saturday, how do you see it playing out, and what do you ultimately see as the final score?
Really, it's a top 5 opponent. It's going to be tough. I know Purdue will be at home, and they'll probably have a pretty good crowd there, So, but yeah, I think Penn State's just going to kind of control this game, and I think Purdue will be able to get in the end zone, but ultimately this is going to be a Penn State. Just Penn State's got too many weapons on offense, too many weapons on defense to really help Purdue's offense down. So, really kind of see scoreboard going like Penn State 38, Purdue 14 maybe.
We appreciate it. Sean Williams covers Purdue and does a lot for the 24/7 Sports Network. We're happy to have him on board with us to give us the lowdown on the Boilermakers. Sean, we'll talk to you soon. Enjoy the rest of the season. I know it's not all that pretty, but I'm sure Purdue fans appreciate that coverage.
Yeah, thanks a lot, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you. That's going to do it for this episode of the Lions 24/7 podcast. Big thanks to Sean for joining us. Before him, you heard from Tyler Calvaruso, our recruiting expert at Lions247.com. I encourage you to check out all his coverage over at the site. Speaking of coverage, Wednesday night, we're back on the Penn State practice field. We'll get another look at these Nittany Lions. It'll be a chance to check on some player availability questions, including running back Nick Singleton, who left that matchup early on Saturday. We'll also have a chance to follow up with James Franklin with some more questions, catch up with some players afterwards. So a lot coming your way at Lions247.com, especially for our VIP subscribers at 30% off right now. We're back with another episode on Thursday, breaking down what we witnessed, what we heard at the practice, and also our predictions and players to watch for this Penn State trip to Purdue, game number 10 on the 2024 schedule. For now, stepping aside, I am Tyler Donahue. Thanks as always for listening to the Lions 24/7 podcast.